Hi, and welcome to Quarantine Cocktails with Chad and Nicole.
This week we're talking about the Rusty Nail cocktail. So this classic cocktail combines two ingredients from Scotland, blended Scotch whiskey and also Drambui, which is a Scotch whiskey based liqueur made with heather, honey, and various herbs and spices. So here's the cocktail.
There's the basic recipe for the classic version.
Yep. So this is the first time that our cocktails have included Scotch. So we'll talk about the history of whiskey a little bit. So whiskey is one of the earliest distilled spirits in Europe, appearing in Ireland around the 12th century.
And the Gaelic term, scotch-based, means water of life, which is essentially a translation of the Latin aqua vita. The English version of the term evolved from that to uscaba, to whiskey ba or bay, and then just whiskey. And in fact, that whiskey form was then backported into Irish Gaelic as whiska, although Scots Gaelic still mainly uses the archaic term or just says whiskey in English, I guess.
So the oldest record of Irish
whiskey.
The oldest record of Irish whiskey is from the 1405 Annals of Clonmacnoise, which recorded the death of a clan head from an excess of aqua vitae. So the oldest record of Scotch whiskey is from the Rolls of Exchequer.
The Exchequer.
Exchequer.
The Exchequer, sweetie.
Exchequer. I want to say it in French.
Okay.
It's more civilized. In 1894, where the king ordered a monastery to produce 1,500 bottles of the aqua vitae.
Yes. So both whiskeys are generally produced from malted grains, and both must be aged at least 3 years in oak casks. Any age statement for both Irish and Scotch whiskey must be based on the youngest spirit component if it's a blend of multiple different whiskeys from different years. And one of the big differences between the two is that Irish whiskey is generally triple distilled, while Scotch whiskey is generally double distilled. And so there's, that additional round of distillation with Irish whiskey tends to mellow and smooth it out a little bit more, whereas the Scots whiskey retains a little bit more of its harsh and strong character.
Well, and then I'm not sure if you've noticed, but sometimes it's spelled Whiskey and Whisky. So what's happening with that E? In Scotland and most of the world, they do without the E, while in Ireland and the US, they generally include the E, which is interesting.
But they're basically talking a lot about the same product, just different styles and different production mechanisms. So all Scotch whiskey was originally made from malted barley, although later on different grains, including rye and wheat, came to be used as well. And so a single malt whiskey contains only malted barley and only spirits from a single distiller, although it may contain multiple different spirits from different years or even different products that they're putting together into that single malt product. Blended malt whiskey will combine different single malts, so maybe from multiple distillers or multiple distillery locations, and then a blended Scotch whiskey will contain a mix of malt whiskey and grain whiskeys, so including some wheat or rye whiskey as well.
So there were 4 traditionally recognized regions in Scotland for whiskey production. There's the Highlands, the Lowlands, the Isle of Islay, and Campbelltown. But due to the high concentration of producers in this 5th area, the Speyside portion of Highlands was carved out to be a 5th region, and it actually makes up 50% of today's Scotch production, which is huge.
Right, and that's partly due to some of its terrain and also its geographic position, making it suitable for making certain kinds of whiskeys. So traditionally, peat was used in the malting process in Scotland, and that's a big part of what provides some of that heavy smokiness that you often find in scotches.
Which I like.
Yes, especially those hailing from Islay or the Highlands, while a lot of the lowlands and Speyside distilleries moved away from peat to coal and coke based processes, which gave them a little bit more consistency, but also took out a lot of that smokiness. And so, they're sort of like, do you prefer the smokiness or do you prefer sort of a smoother characteristic? But in any case, we'll turn our attention to our second main ingredient now, which is Drambui.
So Drambui originated on the Isle of Skye, which is the second largest island in Scotland. It's located off the western coast. Drambui is about 40% alcohol by volume, a liqueur based on Scotch whiskey, heather honey, and some proprietary blend of herbs, spices, and botanicals, much like many liqueurs that we've talked about.
So Drambuie's history is closely tied with a famous Scotsman by the name of Charles Edward Stuart, also known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. So he was the scion of the deposed Stuart House, which had lost the throne of Great Britain to William of Orange in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Bonnie Prince Charlie was raised in Rome, and he led the Jacobite Rising in 1745 and 1746, which was a failed attempt to restore the Stuart dynasty to the throne.
This is all bringing back episodes of Outlander for me. After his defeat at the Battle of Culloden, the Bonnie Prince went into hiding and traveled all around Scotland, moving frequently to avoid capture, and the 30,000 pound price on his head. That's about, 20 million today?
20 million US.
So he was a wanted man. For a period of time, he was under the protection of one Captain John McKinnon of the Isle of Skye, and McKinnon is said to have received a recipe for Charles's own personal medicinal tincture, either from Charles' doctor, or it's said to maybe have been a Frenchman in his company, or from the Bonnie Prince himself.
So from there, the recipe was kept by the McKinnon family for generations until 1873, when it passed to the Ross family, who ran an inn on the island there. They combined it with whiskey and honey and served it to their guests. And one of their guests proclaimed it to be an Drambui. I'm probably butchering that. A drink that satisfies. And from there, the anglicized name Drambui was coined and registered by the Rosses in 1893.
So Eleanor Ross later made a deal with Callum McKinnon, so no relation to the other McKinnons, who began commercial production of Drambui in Edinburgh in 1908. The McKinnon family owned Drambui for over a century, but then sold it to the William Grant and Sons Company, which is another distiller that owns Glenfiddich, the Balvenie, Monkey Shoulder, as well as Hendrick's Gin and Sailor Jerry Rum. So they're quite a big.
Yeah, they're the largest independent Scotch distiller today. So the Rusty Nail now we'll turn our attention to, and this cocktail was first recorded. So the first inklings of this cocktail, maybe in written form, was a program from 1937 for the British Industries Fair in Birmingham, England. And they had a cocktail that was featured known as the BIF that combined Drambui and Scotch. Although, we're assuming that there were existing combinations of those, given the two so closely hailing from the same locale. Also later, there was a drink recorded also with the same ingredients called the Little Club No. 1 in Ted Saussier's cheeky book from 1951 called Bottoms Up.
The Rusty Nail is most often credited to the famous 21 Club in Manhattan in the 1950s, where it's said to have been stirred with the eponymous hardware, if you can imagine it, stirring a drink with a rusty nail. I hope they had tetanus shots, I'll say that. And the recipe got the seal of approval from Gina McKinnon herself in 1963. Many sources now claim that it actually originated at a bar in Hawaii in 1942 and was only popularized by the 21 Club. So, like, as we research all of these,
Yes, they're different
the
threads.
origins, are
So
unknown.
What really brought the rusty nail full-fledged to popular consciousness was that it was said to have been a favorite of the Rat Pack of the 1960s. So this crew, consisting of Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, were often seen roaming about in Las Vegas and having a good time while imbibing their favorite cocktails. So the recipe for the rusty nail has varied over time, with proportions ranging from 1-to-1 to 4-to-1 whiskey to Drambui. Most modern recipes lean to around 2-to-1 to 3-to-1. And so today we'll be making it with a 2-to-1 ratio.
So for the version of the cocktail we will be making today, we're going for the 2-to-1. And we juice the cocktail up a bit with additional Scottish flair by including a wash of Peaty Isla single malt and some bitters from a well-known Scottish bitters producer, Dr. Adam Elmgerab.
Yes, and so we're calling this drink Nailed It, Laddie.
So we're actually adding a third whiskey element of the Ardbeg.
That's right. And then we're also adding in, so we've got the Ardbeg here, which is the very strongly peaty.
You missed a D here.
Oh, yeah. The very strongly peaty Scotch from Islay. And then for our blended Scotch whiskey, we're using this excellent Duncan Taylor 12-year, which has a lot of great, interesting character to it as well. Not overly pricey. The Ardbeg's a little more expensive, but this one's not overly pricey and available quite widely. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we've got our Drambui, which is kind of the essential element to make this truly a rusty nail. If you're following along at home and you want to use some simple syrup or the honey syrup that we had last week, you can do that. But, maybe think of it more as a Scotch old-fashioned at that point. And we are incorporating some bitters as well, just to give a little bit of extra spiciness. And we're using the Dr. Adam Elmgerab Orinoco Bitters. These are aromatic bitters that were reformulated. So our Dr. Adam is actually quite well known for having been the one who reformulated Boker's Bitters back in 2009 based on a bunch of interviews with his descendants and finding like one of remaining bottle of Boker's Bitters somewhere that had disappeared, at the time of Prohibition. He's got a number of different bitters. You don't need to use this one. You could use Angostura, but this one's quite nice. And we really like the fact that it was an all Scottish lineup for our cocktail today. Mm-hmm. All right, shall we get started making the cocktail?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So we're going to start with our Ardbeg wash, and we'll just put a teaspoon of each in each of our glasses. So we're using double old-fashioned glasses. We've got our Ardbeg in there. We'll give it a good swirl to get that on the side. What we're really trying to do is get the nose, but we'll also leave the teaspoon or half teaspoon of Ardbeg in the glass just to give an extra blast of peatiness. I want to really get that peaty nose going, so that's good. I think we'll put the ice in now, and then we'll pour the other ingredients on top of the ice.
This is a drink just made in your glass.
That's right. We're just going to build this in the glass, kind of like the old-fashioned or the Sazerac. It's kind of whiskey forward. You don't want it actually to be too cold because you'll lose out on getting the opening up of the whiskey if you get it too cold. So we're using unchilled glasses and building our drink over our large ice cubes.
Our big rocks we've got here.
And that'll keep it cool enough and start to dilute it without diluting it too terribly much or making it too terribly cold. Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll go with 1.5 ounces of our blended Scotch. Mm-hmm. Just pouring that in there. over the ice cube.
Looks good.
So that gives us our start on our cocktail. Again, that's the Duncan Taylor 12, quite delicious, for about $30 a bottle, which is, pretty good. And for a blended scotch, I think it's got a lot of character. So next up, we've got the Drambui. And we're going for 3/4 of an ounce. Now, a lot of people are going with a 1/2 ounce for modern, but I thought with the extra Ardbeg, it kind of still needed a little bit more sweetness to hit my flavor profile. So go pump it up to 3/4 of an ounce. And then finally, we have our bitters, which I'll go for 2 dashes. So I'm using my 1/4 teaspoon as a 2 dash measure. And just dropping that in over the top. And then at home, you can simply use your own finger, or you can stir it with a spoon to just give it a nice stir and get those ingredients well incorporated.
Your finger.
Well,
Use a spoon.
Okay, my dear.
Or a rusty.
Or a rusty nail. And then, of course, we're going to finish with our garnish, which, as we know, is not just a superfluous visual thing, but is actually there to give some nice brightness by expressing the citrus oils over the top of the drink.
Now, why a lemon?
I think the lemon just pairs best with
Brightens
this.
it up a little bit?
Brightens it up, a little tartness, not too sweet. Like an orange might be, but not too bitter, like a grapefruit or a lime might make it. So I think lemon hits the spot nicely. Often goes well with whiskey. You'll often see whiskey sours and other whiskey citrus related drinks using a lemon primarily, although we have seen a few with the lime, like the lion's tail that we did. All right, I think now our drink is complete. And we'll take a sip and see how it is.
Slancha.
Slancha.